Right. So up to this point in Playmaker, we've kind of been doing really, really simple behaviors with global variables to track things like direction that the ball or direction that the spawner should be moving, or like whether you have a key or not. So let's do something a little bit different today. I made a little simple example of a game, which is just a door that opens when you walk up to it. And I'd like to make it so that that door opens when I pick up the key. And we kind of did something similar before. We made it so that you picked up the key, and then when you walked up to it, the door would open, right? But what if I want it so that when I pick up the key, the door opens?
You said the trigger on the key?
So before, I would say yes. You would say have a trigger, animate the door. But remember, I still want this door to open when I walk up to it. Right? So there's two ways to open this door. That's the key difference. One way is I walk up to the door. I literally just walk up to it and the doors will open. Right? Another way is that I want to pick up the key and the doors will open. So the door is kind of set up like this. Waiting to open. That's the state machine. There's a trigger and then it calls opening. Right? So I want this door to open in two different ways. But I don't want to just put a trigger here that opens the door, like that animates the door, and a trigger here. What if I want like 3 things that open the door? What if I want a switch over here that opens the door as well? Or what if I want like 10 different keys and they all kind of open the door? Think about like a switch that you would hit in a game. So the script for the door is actually pretty simple. Instead of a trigger, I just have a space bar just to act as a trigger. So if I hit space bar, it causes the door to open. So here's the iTween that you guys have used before, right? This is just an iTween. It just causes the doors to animate open. So like these just slide open. So the iTween here in the opening state just says, hey, move both the doors. There's another one to move the left door and one to move the right door. This is on the door itself. So do you see that transition where it says open here? That thing is fired when I hit spacebar. So I hit spacebar, and it sends the open event. This is not really anything crazy. This is a really simple state machine, right? So this is what the event is here in the Events tab. But now, in Playmaker, there's a little checkbox next to the event, which we've never checked before. But this checkbox is actually really important, because what this checkbox means is that state machines outside the door can now fire that transition. Any other object in my game can fire this transition on the door. It doesn't have to be the door that fires the transition. So anything else can actually fire open on the door itself. Is that clear? Like, basically, I have this thing, I have this state machine on the door, and right now the door can fire open, but anything else can too, once I check that checkbox. So I hit open, it'll automatically do the iTween. So here's the key. So the key has a new event. So this is what the key trigger looks like. So there's a touch trigger. It has a state. And this is the new action that we're going to be using today to track score, to stop the movement of the spawner, to do anything else to basically talk between 2 different objects in the game. Because we haven't really done that already. We've told another object to start moving, or we've told another object to do something. But in this case, I'm actually telling the object, hey, just do your normal thing that you do to open a door. I don't really care how you do it. Just go ahead and open it. So this send event, there's a drop-down box here that says game object FSM. That's pretty much the only option we're going to choose. So in the lab, you're going to see this option used. In all the places where I use this, it's always going to be game object FSM. And then you basically drag the door into here. And then in this FSM name, there's a little tiny box right here that looks like an upward and facing downward arrow. You click that one, and you get this little box which shows you a name. And it plugs in the name of the FSM. So this name here, door, let me go back. It's this name here in the FSM. When I'm editing the door, see how it says door up there? That's going to show up here. So pick door, and then now in this drop-down box, you see that open event that I checked the checkbox on earlier. That'll show up in this list. So this whole thing is actually on the key. the whole FSM is on the key itself. But it's finding out that there's an event on the door I can fire. And what that means is that when I pick up the key, I can tell the door to fire this open event. So now there's two ways to fire the open event. One, if I hit the space bar. And then two, if I pick up the key will tell the door, hey, go ahead and fire it as if you hit the space bar. And this might not seem like, it's kind of weird like why this is useful, but like it actually becomes really, really useful because it saves you from having to copy, paste, and duplicate all your work everywhere you want to do it, right? Like this door has two I-tweens in it. I could have the key do the same I-tweens on the door. I could have these I-tweens in the key itself, which is what we did before, right? But instead, what if I ever wanted to change the speed at which the doors open, right? Or like I want to change how the doors open. Well, then I'd have to go every single place where I ever animated a door and update all of them at the same time. And the benefit to using an event that sent from the key is that now all these I-tweens are actually controlled by the door. So the door itself is the only one that ever moves it. So we're going to be doing that today. We're going to be using send event, and we are going to be making our Kaboom clone a little bit more polished. So in Zool, just so you guys can follow along when there's time, I put a copy of the lab. So it's a very long, like one page or 30-page document. Hopefully there's, hopefully all the images are here. Okay. So this kind of includes a table of contents just because like there's so many things. And the way I'm going to go about doing this is I'm going to first show you guys how to implement like the various pieces. And then you guys are going to spend the entire rest of the class picking and choosing and adding pieces where you think you want to improve your game. So here are all the different mechanics that I go over how to do, including how to set up waves for your game. So basically how to set up so that your game will have the behavior where it spawns 10 balls, waits, and then spawns 20 balls, and then waits, and then spawns 30 balls, and then waits. So it's basically like Kaboom. Also how to improve the way that the balls drop. Right now the balls drop due to gravity, but if you watch in the video here, the balls are actually not dropping according to gravity. You notice that they're actually dropping at a constant rate here. So it goes over how to do that. A player lives mechanic. So something that isn't shown in the video, but I'll show you here. Is as I lose paddles. So see how I lost one. So then I only have 2 paddles left, right? And if I were to lose another one, I would have 1 paddle left. And then I die. And then the level restarts. So talking about the lives mechanic. So how to implement those. As well as how to do score. So the score is shown at the top. Music and audio, how to hook that up, along with effects on the actual balls touching the paddle. And then any post-processing, so things like blue. So I want to go over one usage case of a very simple case of how to send an event to something. And so I'm going to actually open up the old lab that I had. That's weird. And then show you guys how to actually use remote events in your games. Any questions so far on this stuff? Okay. Let's open up the week 6. I think I want to do this one. Right, so here is my old game. There's a spawner. So I would like to make it so that I can hit spacebar and just stop the spawner from moving. Okay. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and get this thing to not do any spawning. I'm just going to disable this. So all it's going to do is just going to move back and forth. So how do I get it so that I tell that thing to stop moving back and forth? It's kind of freaking out right now. It's like doesn't know where to go. It's like a like a fly trapped in a jar. So as I said before, I want to actually stop the spawner from moving. So there's two ways to do this, and I'm going to show you guys the old way that we would do this. So remember, I want this thing to stop moving when it hits spacebar, right? So here's the FSM for the spawner, and it just has one state in it that says, hey, set the velocity, and then don't worry about this. We're not gonna, I'm gonna remove that. Basically, set the velocity based on the direction. You guys have all done this. It's basically how the spawner is moving. Now, if I want this thing to stop moving when it hits spacebar, this is how I could do it. I could add a state in here that says stop moving. And I can have an event in here that says get key down when I hit the spacebar. And the spacebar here is going to send an event that says, hey, stop moving. Like that. And all this thing is going to do is going to set the velocity of this thing to be all zeros. Okay. So let's keep this open on the side. So this is what our FSM is doing. I can still move the player around. And if I hit spacebar, the spawner stops moving, right? So instead what I can do, instead of putting this behavior in a spacebar on here, I'm actually going to remove this get key down from the spawner. The spawner is not going to respond to keys or anything like that. Instead, I'm going to check this checkbox that says stop moving. This thing has to be true. As soon as you check that, now you can actually find that event in any other object in your game. So if I go to the player, and here's my input script on the player. I'm going to get rid of this. And I can add something in here that's a get key down. So when I hit spacebar, it does something. And it would be nice if I could just pick the stop moving. Notice here that it doesn't actually show you any events outside of this playmaker object. It always says none here. So if you want to actually tell the spawner to stop moving, you actually have to grab the spawner and tell him to stop moving. So let's do that here. I'm going to remove this. Let's add a new FSM. So we're going to do a get key down. This time I'm putting this on the player. I'm going to hit spacebar on the player. And I'm going to add a new event that says tell spawner to stop moving. Now we're going to use, the reason why I'm doing it this way is because I want to show you this is how we're going to actually have the spawner stop moving after it spawned 10 balls, right? Like in Kaboom, it spawns 10 bombs and then waits until you click and then starts moving again. So in order to do all that behavior, we need this event to actually fire. So I'm going to tell the spawner to stop moving. I'm going to rename this one, say waiting for space. And here's where I'm actually going to use that event. So there's an event, there's an action called send event. And this is all in the lab. So now this is the key. This is how I can tell the spawner to fire its normal transition that happens. So I actually pick GameObject FSM here. This is the only thing you'll ever choose. And then here, I'm going to specify the GameObject. And I'm just going to drag the spawner into here. And when I do that, I get a little drop-down box of all the different Playmaker FSM components that live on the spawner. So one of these is the one that actually has the event that I made. So the move FSM, this is another reason why naming them is important. These names here correspond to the names on the Playmaker FSM. So see how it says spawn here, and collider here, and move. And move is actually the one where it had the event. Okay. So here's my move. I'm going to put there. And if you did it right, when you pick this, now you see that event is the name of the event that I added on the spawner. Okay. And so I'm going to rename this like so. So let's play. So this is on the player. The player is going to hit space and then tell the spawner to stop moving. Just to prove, I'm actually going to go to the spawner. So here is the spawner FSM. There's nothing in here in its actions to tell it to fire this transition. It is just waiting, right? But if I hit spacebar, it actually moves. Something told it to fire this transition by itself, and that was me. That was me as the player doing it. I just moved that spacebar action from the spawner to the player, and it still worked. And what's nice is that it doesn't have to just be on the player, right? What if I added a trigger in the level that told the spawner to stop moving too? So I go here, I'm just going to add a trigger now, right here. And this is going to act as my, my trigger. Okay. What if I want this trigger so that when it touches the player, it also tells the spawner to stop moving, right? So I can add an FSM on here. I already made this thing a trigger. Add a trigger event. Again, I'm going to make another event called tell spawner to stop moving. Send that event here. Waiting for a player. Like so. This thing is the same thing. I'm going to send an event. The option here is going to be game object FSM. I'm going to specify game object here. I'm going to drag the spawner in here, pick the move FSM component, and tell the spawner to stop moving. Okay, so there it is again. There's my player. Oh, I didn't actually set the player tag correctly. The player is tagged as player. Let's just go back to the cube here, collide with the player. Play. So remember, I can hit spacebar to stop the spawner, but if I walk the trigger correctly, the trigger also stops the spawner from moving, right? So now the spawner has stopped moving, and I don't actually have to, I can do more things, right? Maybe I can have the spawner, after it stops moving, wait 2 seconds and then start moving again. Even after someone tells me to stop. It's up to me. So if I put a wait in here for 2 seconds, and just start moving again, now the spawner will automatically start moving again. Even though I told it to stop, the spawner itself chooses what to do. So notice after 2 seconds there, it started moving it. I hit spacebar, it'll stop it, and then keep going again. Oh, the trigger doesn't reset, but that's fine. Neither does my spacebar. So this important bit is that now I can actually properly communicate between multiple objects inside our game. And this is like really important to make sure that things like you can do power-ups or applying damage properly to enemies if you shoot them with bullets, or having the player take damage properly. So we've been using global variables up to this point, but sending events from one object to another is a really important piece too. And it's what we're going to use to make our spawner behave more like a real game. Okay. All right, so kind of inside the lab here, there's a lot of different options. I'm going to actually just go over only one of them for now, which is the waves mechanic, because it's kind of the more complicated one. So I'm going to show you how to set this thing up. And once I do this, then I'm going to let you guys go. And all the other ones are rather straightforward to implement. Only this one is actually a little bit more complicated, and I want to go over how to set it up correctly. Okay. Any questions so far on setting your event? Does it make sense when you would want? Maybe it doesn't make sense when you would want to use it right now, but I'm going to show you cases of where you're going to use it, and then hopefully over time you'll figure out like, oh yeah, this is a good case for me to use it, right? So okay, so let me turn on the spawner behavior again, and actually let me just disable the kill plane for now. I don't really care if the balls are ignored, and also let me get rid of this trigger that stops the ball from spawning. Okay, so our game right now is not quite set up like, actually in this case I have set it up. I'm going to reset it back to what it was before. All this stuff. This is what the finished product looks like. A lot of wires everywhere. It'll make sense, I swear. Okay, there's flip, there's spawn. Now wait. So now the way this is set up, it'll just continually spawn. Oops.
I think there's only one flip. There's only like the 3 states.
In this case, there's actually, yeah, I don't know why there's 4 here. I think I set it up so there's actually a wait. I think here I actually put the wait in. I mean, it looks like this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is more like what it looks like for everyone else, right? So this is basically what the game should be. You the bombs kind of spawn infinitely. Although for me, it's not actually spawning. Flip. Oh, right. That's the last bit. Oh, let me get rid of the sound too. Don't need that. Flip. Reverse the direction, otherwise spawn an object. I'll put the weight in here. Okay. So this is kind of like an infinite version of the game. It doesn't speed up at all. The spawner don't increase. But I'd like to set it up so that it actually spawns a limited number of balls. I actually don't know why it actually stopped there either. Oh, probably because I need to change this too. Sorry, this script actually has a little bit more in it than I want. I'm going to get rid of the kill plane. There's the player, collider, spawner. All right, another thing too is, let me just make sure this spawner, yeah, this is actually, I'm gonna delete this thing, place another one. See here, the spawner is working as I want now, and it's spawning actually, it doesn't ever stop. So I want to do a couple things first. First, I want this thing to kind of stop spawning after 10, and then as long as I've picked up all the balls, I want it to spawn 20 and then stop, and then 30 and then stop, and then 40. And it's just going to keep spawning more and more bombs until I either miss them all or the game crashes, which will be, it never really ends. So let's set up a couple things first. First, we have to make this spawner stop after it's spawning 10 balls. That's kind of the first thing. Let's just try to get it to stop after it spawns 10 balls and nothing else. So that kind of means that we have to keep track of how many balls it's supposed to spawn. And right now, there's no behavior in here to say whether or not it should keep spawning the balls. So right now it just says go ahead and wait a little bit, spawn an object, and then see if I should flip directions or not. And if I flip directions, just reverse the direction and then spawn again. So instead, what I like to do is I like to change this behavior so that before it goes to spawn an object again, I'd like it to check to see if it should keep spawning more. So why don't we just have something in here that lets me stop spawning the balls just completely. So we're just going to add a new state here. It says stop spawning. And after it spawns 1, I'm actually going to have it go, instead of back to spawning, notice how these things go back to spawning? I'm just going to have it go here instead. So this is what our state machine currently is going to look like. Okay. I'm just going to have it stop spawning and nothing else. So what it should do is just spawn 1 ball and then completely stop, right? There it is, 1 ball and it completely stops because it ends up in this state. Okay, so we know that as long as we can get it into this state, then it'll stop spawning the balls. So how about this? Why don't we add something so that it doesn't always go into this state, right? So if I add yet another state here, so here's where you can imagine, oh my gosh, you can imagine that this state here is where we're going to end up after we spawn 10. So if I add yet another one here, I'm going to go put both of these into here. So I'm going to name this thing check if I should stop spawning. Okay, I'm going to go real simple. And then I'm going to add 2 new transitions here. This is what our state machine currently looks like. I'm going to add a couple new events. One is called continue spawning. And I'm going to add another one that says next level. We're just going to use this one. I'm going to name this one stop spawning. Okay, so check if I should stop spawning has one option, whether it continues to spawn here. So I added that transition back to the spawn. Another one is that it should stop spawning, it should go here. Okay. So this thing doesn't actually do anything right now. So if I play, it's still going to spawn 1 and end up in this state. Notice here, that's where it ends up. So let's add some behavior here. Let's just, for now, randomly have it stop spawning after 50% of the time. So I can use a send random event. And I'll have 2 options here. One is to randomly continue spawning. One is to randomly stop spawning. And I'll give them both a 50% chance. Or maybe I'll have continue spawning have like 80%, and this one have 20%. So what you should see is that it should loop a couple times, hopefully. So notice it looping, and then it stops after a while, right? So our state machine kind of works now where we can control what should happen, only I don't want to do it randomly. I don't want to actually set up our spawner to randomly stop. So I'm actually going to delete this. I just wanted to show that it actually could work. So what we instead want to do is keep track of how many bombs we're supposed to spawn at all. So in here, what if I had a number that tracked how many balls I had spawned so far? Okay. So let's add a variable here. And I'm going to add a variable called number of balls left. Okay, it's an integer, and I'm going to start off at 10. And all I want to do is I want to subtract 1 from this number every time I spawn a ball. Because I'm going to use this as basically like a counter. This is how many balls I have left in my bucket that I'm spawning. I'm going to start with 10. I'm just going to subtract 1 from it every time I spawn a ball. So right after I create this object, I'm just going to do an int operation. There's an action called Int Operator. It lets you do things like add or multiply or divide, all these different things to a number. So I'm going to take this number of balls left, and I'm going to subtract 1 from it. Okay? I'm going to store it back into number of balls left. All right? So now that every time it spawns, for now I'm actually just going to have these things spawn repeatedly. These things are basically disabled. Just act like they don't exist. So if I look at this number here, can you guys see that? It's starting off at 10. Oh my god, you really can't see that very well. Maybe I can go here. I can actually do this. You click this little checkbox and it'll show up down here. So see that number of balls left is 10. That number is going to start at 10 and then go down every time that it spawns a ball, right? So it goes down to 0, then starts going negative. I want it so that when it hits 0, it stops spawning. Right? So in the spawner, so I'm going to go plug these back in here. I'm going to do another action. I'm going to compare to see if that int is still greater than 0. So I'm going to take the number of balls left here, and if it's equal to or less than 0, that's the number I'm comparing against, I'm going to stop spawning. Otherwise, if it's greater than 0, I'm just going to go ahead and continue spawning. So now what you'll see is that this number is going to represent how many balls I need to spawn. So it's going to loop this thing 10 times. And then when this number hits 0, it's going to stop. And so there's no more balls coming out. Notice it ended up here in this state, right? And now why don't we tell it to also stop moving? Remember we set it up so that this move can respond to the stop moving action. I'm going to delete this transition here. Or I'm just going to delete this wait. So here's our spawner. Where it stops spawning, I'm also going to tell it to stop moving as well. So I'm going to do a send event. The target is going to be me, because I am the spawner. So I'm going to pick GameObjectFSM, use the owner. And I'm going to tell the mover to stop moving, just like what we did with the keyboard and with the trigger. So now if we play, did I actually not do the movement behavior? Set velocity. Oh, I gotta get rid of this. I don't know why that's there. Let's try that again. So I'm gonna watch the FSM for the mover, make sure it stops. And there you can see the spawner actually stopped moving. It's actually in this state now. Okay? We're building up the behavior for the game, right? Okay, so next I want to do is I want to set it up so that after just a couple of seconds, it starts spawning things again, right? So here I'm in spot. I don't actually want to stop forever. So this state here down the bottom, I actually want this thing to start moving again after a couple of seconds, right? So I'm actually going to put in a wait. Actually, instead of a wait, why don't we just have it so that you have to click the button to have it start moving. So I'm going to do a get mouse button down, because that's kind of what I set up in the game anyway. And all it's going to do is I'm just going to get mouse button down, fire a new event that's called new level. And on new level, I'm going to tell it to go spawn again. So this is not actually going to work, but I'm going to show you what actually happens. It's going to get to this thing, and it's going to wait for me to click a button. And it's going to immediately go back to spawn and then stop again. So here's 10. Now it's waiting for my mouse click. So I click, it spawns 1, and then stops. And the reason for that is because if you look at the number of balls to spawn, it's still decreasing and going into negative. So in addition to actually telling it to start spawning again, I need to set that value of the number of balls I need to reset the number of balls that I want to spawn back to 10. So let's add another final new state. This is going to be kind of the last state that we add, which is going to be increase level. So we're going to increase the difficulty. So I'm going to go send that state to here. And this thing is going to set an int value. This is all in the lab as well. You'll see all this stuff. And the int variable I'm going to do is the number of balls left. I'm going to set it equal to 10. And then when that's done, I'm just going to have it spawn again. Okay? Or I can make it like 50 if I wanted to. We're going to make this based on the level that you're currently at. But for now, it's just going to be 50. So it's going to spawn 10. I can move left and right. I click the button. The number of balls left to spawn, which is currently 0, is going to jump up to 50. It's going to spawn 50. But we're missing another piece. The spawner is still stopped, right? So we have to tell the spawner to start moving again, which is the final piece to getting the spawner behavior to work more like a level. So it's actually spawning. It's going to spawn 50, and there it's done. So it goes here. It's going to wait for me to click it again, and it's going to spawn 50 more. Okay. All right. So then in increased level, there's one more thing we're going to add, which we're going to tell the spawner to keep moving. So let's go back to the spawner. Let's go to his move. He's in this state here, stop, but he never is able to leave. So we have to add one more event, which is start moving. And it's going to be made global. And we're going to add another transition here, start moving, go back here. And all we have to do is inside our spawner, after we increase the level and reset the number of balls to 50, we're going to send another event. And this time we're going to tell it to start moving again. And this is kind of the most complicated state machine that we have. So there, spawn 10, and the spawner started moving already. So we took the behavior before, which was just infinite spawning, and we turned it into something more, more like a wave-based spawning. So now the number of balls left is 10. So it's going to behave a lot more like Kaboom, right? And I click, it's going to spawn 10 more. Okay. And every time I click, it's going to spawn 10 more. So we have the mechanic now where it starts and it stops and it spawns and it stops spawning. Now let's add the concept of a level, because the current level that you're at controls everything in our game. It controls how much score you get. It controls how fast the balls fall. It controls how fast the spawner actually moves. And eventually it can control how many lives you have as well. So let's go here. And increase level, we're not actually doing anything. What I want to do here is that this number 10, I actually want it to be 10 at first, and then 20, and then 30, and then 40, and then 50. And that number is going to keep going up the higher the level it is. And at the same time, I also want to make everything else go faster, right? So let's go to variables. We're going to add a global variable this time, because I want everything to know what level we're at. And so I actually already added it here. It's just an integer variable. There's a global variable for an integer, and I have it starting at level 1. Okay. So now that it starts at level 1, this value here, what I can actually do is I can make it based on the current level. If I just multiply the current level by 10, I get a new number of balls that are supposed to spawn based on the level. So I can do another int operation here. Instead of doing a set in value, I'm going to delete this. And I'm going to take the current level, and I'm going to multiply it by 10. And I'm going to store it in the number of balls left. Okay? So this operation takes our current level, which is right now 1, multiplies it by 10, and then puts it back into the number of balls left. And then right before I do this, I'm going to do another int operator, which is I'm just going to increase the current level by 1. So I'm going to take the current level, I'm going to add 1 to it, and I'm going to put it back into the current level. Okay. So this level up actually does two things. One, it actually adds 1 to the current level, and then 2, it multiplies the number of balls by the current level. So now the way it's set up is that every time after it spawns 10, it's going to increase the level and the number of balls to spawn. So here's 10 balls. You can see here the level is currently 1. now it's going to start to spawn 20. So if you see over here, this thing actually started at 20, it's going down. And then if I click, it's going to go to 30. Okay. Okay, one more thing before I let you guys work on the lab for the rest is let's actually use the level now. Let's decrease the time it takes between spawns every time it levels. You guys did this last week for part of the homework, but now I actually want to just change it so that it gets faster. So right now the time between spawns is 0.5 seconds. Instead of using that, I can actually use a variable here, which is I made it a global variable for spawn delay. And spawn delay, I'm going to actually have it start at 0.5 seconds. And then every time I level up, in addition to doing all this stuff, I'm going to do a float multiply, because the spawn delay starts at 0.5. I'm going to multiply it by 0.9, which will make it a little bit smaller. Okay? And one more thing I did in the lab, which is you don't have to do, but I find it to just be as failsafe, it's very common, is something called a clamp. And a clamp just says, don't ever let this number, which is a spawn delay, get lower than this value, which I'll set to be 0.01, or higher than this value. I'll just put 2. It doesn't really matter. This thing is never hit. But this makes it so that the spawn delay will never get too fast. It'll always have a little bit of time in there. Otherwise, if you play the game long enough, then eventually the spawn delay would be really short. So now, every time I level up, the spawn delay is actually going to get a little bit faster. So it's actually going to spawn these balls a little bit quicker every time. About 10% faster every time. Okay, it's spawning one more. Okay. And then now the actual spawn delay is much faster. It's about 40% faster than what it was originally. And this is basically what you guys all did, right? So that takes care of the spawning. This behavior now there are waves that you can consider. So the remaining bits are actually quite simple. One, you have to tell when the balls hit the ground. Two, you have to give the concept of lives to the player. And then you add a bunch of polish to it, effects and audio. And it kind of finishes up Kaboom. This behavior of the spawner is actually what the core mechanic of Kaboom is. All the other parts, like score, is based around the idea of a level. But all this stuff here is all set up inside the lab here. So if you go and open up the document and go to waves, we start off with this, and we end up with this. Right. I just colored them green because you can do that if you want to. You can color your states if you want. If you ever wanted to be more organized. But these are the 3 states we added, right? Check if I should stop spawning, stop the spawning, and then increase the level, which does all of these things here. Which basically just speeds up the game and then makes the number of balls that are left go up. Okay. All right. So for the rest of the class today, I'm going to go around and help you guys kind of work on polishing up your game. This document is meant for reference, so if you want to implement any of these things, you can add them, and I describe how to do that. And anything else you'd like to do, or more things maybe that aren't even in this document, why don't you give me your ideas, and then we can talk about it, and maybe we can add it together. Okay. Some other cool things, like something that we haven't done, I think you guys would like the post-processing one too. It's kind of interesting because in post-processing, like it's a very unnecessary bit, but you can have all these options for changing how the game looks. You have all these scripts like bloom or depth of field or anti-aliasing that you can just stick on your camera, and it'll cause your game to look more like the video that I showed here. So it's actually just bloom and anti-aliasing together. This is also me using the mouse to control it too. All right, so it'll be an open lab for the rest of the class, and then I'll I'll go around and grade homework. You guys can take a break if you need to. Before you leave, show me your work because it'll count as homework for next week. It'll count as your homework credit for next week. All right, any questions? I know that was a lot, so take the rest of class and work through the document as you can.